Please take your seat. The program will be starting soon. Welcome to Politico Securing Europe, NATO's Next Steps. Please welcome Politico's Deputy Managing Editor of Global Security, Dave Brown.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Dave Brown. I'm the Deputy Managing Editor for Global Security, and as of just a few minutes ago, your new Pope. I'm going to hell for that joke. Anyway, today we're here to cap off the Munich Leaders Meeting in partnership with the Munich Security Conference. The partnership between Politico and MSC was announced in January this year, followed by the debut of the Politico Pub in Munich, where a slate of live interviews with top government officials and industry leaders broke news in real time on the shifts between the United States and Europe under the Trump administration. This week, we were so proud to continue our partnership with the Munich Security Conference. And while this event occurs at the conclusion of the Munich Leaders Meeting, there's still more to come from us. Next Thursday, we ask that you join us at the Capitol Turnaround for Politico's Security Summit, where we'll hold interviews and roundtables on the topics of defense, foreign affairs, cybersecurity, and space. But before that, let's kick things off with Politico Live's Securing Europe, NATO's Next Steps. This year's Munich Leaders Meeting brought together an exclusive group of transatlantic leaders. And it took place as the state of the security alliance between the United States and Europe poses new challenges for NATO and its future. Today, we aim to examine the next steps for NATO and for government officials on both sides of the Atlantic as they look to chart the path ahead. So let's get things started with a conversation between Benedikt Franke, Vice Chairman and CEO of the Munich Security Conference, and Robbie Gramer, anchor of National Security Daily. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. I'm really thrilled to be joined by Benedikt here, who's Vice Chair and CEO of the Munich Security Conference. I'm Robbie Gramer. I'm a national security reporter with Politico. I run our NatSec daily newsletter, which my mom recently called one of the best written newsletters that she has ever read. So there's your endorsement. Subscribe if you haven't already. But we're here on the heels of this Munich Security Leaders Meeting, where dozens of top officials convened and met in Washington here to discuss the next steps of the transatlantic relationship, especially in the Trump era. And I want to start with J.D. Vance. The vice president gave a speech this morning to this group that was on record. It was a different tone than the speech he gave in Munich in February at the Munich Security Conference. The February speech was very fiery, very critical of Europe. This one today, he talked about, the importance of working together, avenues for cooperation with Europe. So I guess my question is, which J.D. Vance should we believe? The bad cop J.D. Vance of February or the good cop J.D. Vance that we saw today?
Thanks, Robbie. Thanks for having me. Obviously, you've got your mother under better control than I do. Whereas your mother praises your work, my mother at the beginning of this trip said, "Why are you going over to the US again? Isn't all lost?" See, the reason why we came once again is exactly to have the kinds of moments that we've produced with the vice president today. In fact, one minor correction to your question. The key thing about today's event was that it was not a speech. The vice president came to Munich and delivered a speech and then somehow forgot the Q&A part of it. And we have now made up for that by involving him in a highly interactive discussion. We had questions that were pre-agreed from members of the audience. And I think the fact that he took questions, that the office didn't tell us which questions to take and which ones were off limits. And the fact that he answered all of them in great detail, I thought in a very constructive tone, is an important signal. I do also believe that the speech in Munich was an important signal. And I keep saying, and this is my personal opinion and don't share it with my boss all that often, that while there are some who say that wasn't a foreign policy speech in Munich, that it was more of a preaching, scolding speech, I thought it was a pretty impressive foreign policy speech. If you judge the speech not by some of the exotic examples, if you judge the speech not by the preaching tone, if you judge the speech solely on whether it achieved its intended effect, I think it was great, because I believe the intended effect of that speech in Munich was to really freak us out, to really wake us up. After, and good old friends like Bob Helms in the first row can attest to this, after for 60 years we've seen American after American on our stage in Munich try the same kind of wake-up diplomacy. What we've seen in Munich was pressure point diplomacy. Twisting the arm and you actually know what happens. And
so 3 months out, did it work?
Yeah, I think it worked.
Okay.
I would argue that without that speech and without the resulting outrage, you would have never ever seen the kind of consolidated euro response. You would have never seen a loosening of the debt brake, never in Germany. And that for us is a huge thing. It will allow us to spend upwards of 3% on defense from now on. It has made a huge difference. It was not comfortable, but it worked.
J.D. Vance today talked about 5%. How it's a talking point you hear from this administration. Enough with this 2%. Europe barely got there, but now we want to spend 5% of GDP on defense. Is that realistic or feasible at all for Europe? And if the Americans keep moving the goalpost, doesn't this just set up another round of battles between the Trump administration and Europe for not spending enough?
I think moving the goalposts is a well-tested strategy, and it has its limits. But let's look at the reality. It's not about GDP, it's about capabilities. We in Germany, for example, and we in Europe, we've made promises to NATO when it comes to fulfillment of the defense plans. We are far from having met these promises. And so I think what you will see at the next NATO summit in less than 7 weeks is a focus. Yes, I'm sure there will be a percentage thing agreed, but you may be surprised to find that there'll be added to it some kind of capability requirement. And that I feel much more comfortable about arguing over than this totally random number, which, in years when the economy is good, is a lot bigger than in years when the economy is bad. And that's totally counter-cyclical and not the right thing to do. So focusing on capabilities rather than GDP is the thing to do.
So, on the economy front, there's a bit of a tariff war going on. Can you talk about the impact that will have on Europe's race to rearm?
See, I have some sympathy for those in the current US administration who say we need to sort of redesign some of our trade with Europe and China in particular. But I see and hear far too little discussion about the thing that you're alluding to, namely that this tariff war comes at a time when we need every euro in Europe to focus on defense. And slowing down our economic growth, damaging our export model at a time when we need that money to fulfill the promise we've made to NATO, I think isn't perfectly well thought through.
And has that, you've been in DC for 2 days. Do you feel like that message has gotten through to the right corners of the administration working on these negotiations, or not yet?
Yes, I also believe that at times like these, when things change, in the morning, at lunch and at dinner, it actually pays to step back a few steps and let things play out and not react to every single, tariff decision. And I think this is what you'll see from Europe in the next couple of weeks. We will wait this out on one level, and we will showcase a readiness to engage at another.
This is all happening as the Trump administration tries to advance these negotiations between Russia and Ukraine to finally end this war. There's been some concern amongst some corners in Europe that the Trump administration is offering too many concessions to Russia. One of the proposed plans that Trump put out talks about a U.S. de facto or de jure recognition of Crimea, other occupied territories, no Ukraine in NATO, which was a big strategic goal for Ukraine and other allies, no real commitments from the U.S. side on defense and security in the post-war environment. So I guess my question here is, how many concessions is too many concessions to Russia? And at what point does Europe start to really, really get alarmed about the nature of these negotiations?
There is a very simple answer to this question. It is Ukraine that has to decide how many concessions are too much. It's not up to Europe to freak out. We in Europe have a very clear role right now. We haven't earned our place at the negotiating table, but what we can do now is to ensure that Ukraine ends up in the best possible negotiation position. We are actually, in a bizarre way, grateful to the US administration for having broken the ice, as Ambassador Ischinger said at the press conference earlier today. We are looking at it in the hope, and if I understand what the Vice President has said today correctly, in the justified hope that this peace negotiation is not going to reward the aggressor, and is not stabbing Ukraine in the back.
Do you think it will? Because there's a lot of concern that some of these early concessions, some of these overtures show exactly that happening.
I was massively concerned ahead of that brief meeting between Zelensky and President Trump in St. Peter's in Rome. I thought after that meeting, the narrative of the president did change quite visibly. And everything I've heard since then, I think, was a little more pushy in Russia's direction. I do believe that the president and his administration know full well that I don't think many Americans want Russia to win this war. I don't think many Americans want the enemy out of the Cold War times to get away with aggression. And I think most Americans are aware of the disastrous signals that would send around the world and how that would be perceived as an invitation for China to take Taiwan and Turkey to take Kurdistan and all sorts of other things. So I am less worried now than I was 3 weeks ago.
And you mentioned Europe's seat at the negotiating table.
Non-existing.
Exactly. So, I mean, this has happened on Ukraine. It's happening in these Iran talks. Europe's invite keeps getting lost in the mail. Walk me through a roadmap for Europe to get its invitation to these types of negotiations from an administration that clearly doesn't respect Europe enough to pull up a seat for them.
Yeah. I think it's the totally wrong strategy to sit there and hope to be invited. It should have been us that should have started serious negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. It is our backyard, not the US backyard. On Iran, it's a little difficult. It was our sort of negotiation last time round. It was driven by the EU. It ended in the JCPOA. I think it's a good thing that America is taking the lead now. And we certainly don't need to ask for a place at the table if no one wants us at the table. It brings me to my most important point, and the most important point of this leaders meeting. We Europeans need to get a lot better to persuade the average American and their representatives in Washington that we are a real asset and not a nuisance. And I think for that we need to step up. We need to deliver. And we need to change around the narrative.
So I feel like I've heard we need to step up, we need to deliver.
You've just heard it.
Yeah, I've heard it here.
Me.
I've heard it at Munich in 2024, 2023, 2022, et cetera, going back and back. At what point do you stop the talk and start walking the walk here? And do you think Europe has since this galvanizing speech from Vance in February?
I wish I was better prepared, because then I could now pull out the defense numbers in Europe. I mean, look at how many European nations are now meeting the 2% goal. We're close to, 80% of European nations are now meeting the 2% goal. Some are exceeding it. Look at Germany, where we've been. I've spent a lot of time in the armed forces. And 4 years ago, we spent less than 40 billion per year on defense. It is now close to 100 billion. I mean, I think that is walking the talk, to be perfectly honest. We've bought the F-35. We've bought the Chinooks. We have said we'll increase the size of our military from its current 180,000 to potentially as many as 330,000. We've done a lot. And that was the previous coalition. You will see a much more ambitious German government under Friedrich Merz. And I am 100% sure that isn't lost on people in the administration.
So I want to get to that in a second. But first, I mean, you're giving a pretty positive spin.
It's my job.
Okay, it's your job. I want you to take off your MSc hat for a second. You've given a pretty positive spin on what's happened over the past 3 months, but that is also a 3 months where Trump is openly talking about annexing Greenland, making Canada a 51st state, really roiling transatlantic relations. You have European lawmakers questioning the health of American democracy here. How do you square that circle of what you just said with everything else going on that's emanating from the Trump White House right now?
You know, I do believe several things can be true at once. I believe it can be true that this administration has a strategic objective in increasing European defense capabilities and willingness. I also believe it can be true that at the same time this administration is disruptive, sometimes strategically so, sometimes tactically so, and sometimes probably unwillingly so. Yes, and this is the last time I'm going to be positive in the last 4 minutes and 13 seconds, I promise. But, you know, I run around the world saying not all disruption is negative. Sometimes you need disruption to unblock things. Sometimes you need disruption to overcome hurdles, like the debt break. We really needed disruption to get over that.
And the debt break being that Germany can spend into debt in order to spend more on defense. Am I getting that right?
Correct,
okay.
Yes. And at the same time, I just wish we would see less of these diversionary outbreaks of the Greenland or Canada nature. The average European, I think, just laughs about it. But you're absolutely right in sort of questioning the fact whether in the process of disrupting, how much trust that, you know, our predecessors, mothers, fathers, and so on have built up over the last 50, 60 years, are you actually destroying? And how much is that actually decreasing the value added of what you've made possible? And here, I do believe that today's comments by the Vice President have certainly in Germany, I think, calmed nerves a little. But there is still massive concerns about things that are going on in this country, as I take it. There are still massive concerns in the White House about things that are going on in Germany with our right-wing party, etc., etc.
Briefly, you have a new government. After a bit of a stumble out of the gate yesterday, Friedrich Merz is new chancellor. Is there an opportunity here to reset U.S.-German relations under Merz's government? There seemed to be, shall I say, some bad blood between the Trump team and Scholz's team. Does it seem like both sides are willing, interested, engaging in trying to do a reset here? How far do you think that can go?
So, having spoken to both sides very recently, yes. I believe, yes, you will see a reset. Friedrich Merz will be coming to Washington very soon. I think we're going to see a phone call between President Trump and Friedrich Merz tomorrow. The team, the national security team in particular of the new German Chancellor, is full of long-time Munich Security Conference attendees. To say it as it is, they know their shit. They are actually really good at their job. They know that European security depends on a good relationship with the US. They also know what the legitimate concerns are from the US, and they will address them.
Yeah. Well, that basically slowly wraps up our time here. We had about 18 minutes to solve all transatlantic relations issues, and I feel like we did a pretty good job.
In fact, we could have gone on for a minute and 15 seconds.
How do we fix transatlantic relations, real quick? You've got 1 minute, 9 seconds left.
True story. I think it's all about the narrative. If Americans believe it's worth investing in this relationship, we Europeans need to make the case for it. We are really bad at making the case for the European Union at home. This is why Brexit happened. And we now need to learn the mistakes, or need to learn the lessons from that, and not make the same mistake on the transatlantic relationship. As with every good relationship, you need to work on it every day. You need to invest into it. You need to make the case for it. You need to buy flowers and take her out for dinner. I don't know, you need to do stuff. And that's what we will be doing.
So Europe and the US has to date more.
Yes.
You heard it here first, folks. Thank you so much for taking the time. Stay in your seats because we've got more exciting programming coming. Next
more
up,
exciting than me.
Just as exciting, equally exciting is what I meant to say. We've got Politico's Jack Blanchard, who's sitting down with the Director of Policy Planning with the NATO Secretary General, Benedetta Berti. So please join me in thanking Benedict here and welcoming our next guests on stage.
All right, hello, can you hear me all right? Is that mic picking you up? I can see thumbs up, that's good start. Nice to see you all here. Thank you very much for joining us at the Munich Leaders Meeting 2025. And as you know, we've got some real stars of the security scene here today. I didn't get invited over to the Munich Security Conference this year, but apparently Politico had a pub. Did you see the pub?
We did have a pub.
I love a pub, but I was not. I wasn't on the list. But anyway, for those of you that made it, I hear it was a lot of fun. This is a very exciting interview for me because I was brought over from the UK, as you can maybe tell by my accent, to write Politico's playbook email here in DC a few months ago, and so European-American relations is something very close to my heart. So it's brilliant for me that we've got you here today. I'm sure you already know that this is Benedetta Berti, the head of the policy planning for the Office of the NATO Secretary General, one of the most important positions in looking forward at our transatlantic security future. Benedetta, as the guys were just discussing, we all saw J.D. Vance here this morning speaking in a pretty different tone to what we heard from him in Munich. I was watching on TV and my jaw was certainly on the floor watching that speech then. It was a lot warmer today. Some of the lines we heard from the US and Europe on the same team.
Yep.
It's ridiculous to think you're ever going to drive a wedge between us. It's not Europe bad, America good. Were you heartened by what you heard from the Vice President?
Well, I think there's been quite a bit of consistency from the administration in sending some key messages. Europe and the United States on the same team is one. The importance of NATO to transatlantic security and the fact that a strong NATO is in all 32 member states' national security interest. Those have been consistent messages that I hear from Washington and from our capitals. What I heard today is that that continued commitment to making NATO stronger by the United States, matched by an expectation. And that expectation is that we adapt because we are in the most complex, volatile security environment in generations. And I think that the point that we have been somewhat complacent in recent decades about our security. We spent too little, we produced too little, we underinvested. That's all fair. And the message was, we are invested, we're committed, but we all need to step up and we want to see concrete progress. And I think here we have a good story to tell as NATO Europe, as European allies in Canada, but there is a need to go faster and further.
It's very generous of you to say it's a consistent message. I've definitely heard some different messages from people around the Trump administration over the years, shall we say. You were in Munich. I mean, why do you think we heard this slightly different tone then to what we heard now? Because that was quite an aggressive speech, really.
Well, I think we're seeing, that was a discussion on a very important debate that we have in all our democracies, and how do we balance different considerations between freedom of speech, accountability, civil rights. Today, we were talking about why do we need a transatlantic alliance? It serves our national security interest. It strengthens U.S. national security, strengthens the national security of all our member states, and what do we need to do to future-proof that relationship? So it was very pragmatic, very focused on having a NATO that is stronger militarily, through more defense spending and a stronger defense industrial base, having a NATO that is fairer with a better burden sharing, which is something that we need to do because there is a strategic shift that we know with the rise of the Indo-Pacific and its importance to global geopolitics, and that requires Europeans to take more agency, ownership, and leadership for the conventional defense of Europe. And we talked about a NATO that is able to deliver on its strength and deterrence and defense posture. So it was really, I think, an important conversation about what do we need to do to put our alliance on an even stronger footing.
If you talk privately to European leaders, which I'm sure you do, and we wouldn't want to reveal those conversations, well, we might want to, but we better not reveal those conversations here. Sometimes they will grumble about the way that either Donald Trump or people around him speak about European defense spending. Coming from a NATO perspective, though, you must be quite pleased and grateful to see someone pushing this argument in that direction.
I think we need to face the facts, right? During the Cold War, we spent on average north of 3% of our GDP on defense. Then our security environment changed after the Cold War. We had a few decades of peace dividend, and we underinvested. We spent too little. We halved our GDP, essentially, and the sunk cost is calculated in the trillions of dollars that we lost, right? So now we need to make up, and that requires more defense spending. So the message that all allies, and European allies and Canada in particular, need to step up on their defense spending is not a new message, an important message, a valid message, and one that we fully agree with. I would say just two things. One, we are not starting from scratch. We have 10 years of significant progress. We all know that when we made that defense investment pledge in 2014, there were only 3 countries spending 2% of GDP on defense. Now we have 2/3 of countries, more countries announcing plans to meet 2% as soon as possible. We have several of our allies that are going well beyond 2%. Announcement, for example, from our Baltic allies, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, with goals to meet 5%, Poland at 5% and over. So we have a good story to tell, but where I do agree with the message that has been passed consistently with the Trump administration is that we need to go further and faster, and that 2% is simply not going to be enough. And I think that's an important point, if I may elaborate a little bit. We have, over the last 10 years, essentially done a generational reset of our posture, going back to how do you ensure the territorial defense of Europe. So a very, very big endeavor. And to completely operationalize that vision and those plans, defensive plan that we've approved in 2022, we need capabilities and forces, right? And before we meet at the next NATO summit in The Hague, we're going to agree these new capability targets that essentially, based on our plans, tell us what each country needs to bring to bear to defend credibly Europe. Now, when we do the math, 2% is not going to cover. We'll need to go further. My boss talks about looking at a number that is north of 3%, and this is just for hard defense. We're not talking about cybersecurity, dual-use critical infrastructure. So yes, we need to spend more if we want to be credible and future-proof NATO.
It doesn't help your cause that there are still some countries that aren't even anywhere near 2%. That must be very frustrating.
I think, and I have observed genuine progress from all allies, moving towards meeting that 2% goal, delivering on clear national plans to meet that goal, making significant changes in their own domestic financial regulatory settings so as to be able to spend more and spend better. So what I see from looking from Europe is actually more resolve than I've seen for many years.
Some of the conversations you'll hear privately in Washington amongst some parts of the Trump administration are about pulling some of the US military capability out of Europe. Not all of it, but parts of it, starting to pull that back. Are we in a position, or do you feel NATO's in a position where that's possible and realistic in the next, in this decade?
I'd rather not speculate until a decision is on the table. But what I will say is, if you look at the last 20 years and the way the world has changed, we are now in a strategic environment with simultaneous threats and challenges, with a growing geopolitical importance of the Indo-Pacific, and that requires a shift. So I would say there is a strategic need for Europeans to play a greater role for the conventional deterrence and defense of Europe. And that is a fact that has been, I think, well known for many years now, but I think there is an added level of urgency today. And what we're doing with more defense spending, strengthened defense industrial ecosystem, and this more ambitious capability target is de facto our European allies are taking more responsibility for the conventional defense of Europe within a NATO framework, with a strongly committed United States. And to me, that is a recipe for a fairer and also more effective NATO that contributes to deterrence and defense in a world of strategic competition.
There are supporters of the Trump administration who would argue that, why is America in Europe at all defending Europe? We have our own problems over here, we have our own priorities over here. Can you envisage a world where NATO could operate without the US there, or is that always going to be an essential part of it?
Well, I think I go back to the speech that the Vice President delivered just a few hours ago about the continued importance of transatlantic security, the continued bond, economic culture between Europe and North America. And I would also, and I think I cannot say this better than General Cavoli, secure and a EUCOM commander, who in his recent testimony to Congress explained very, I think, in the best way possible, why being in Europe continues to serve for defense of the homeland, support power projection, and deters aggression. So I think that is a strong case. I'm not making it because I think it's for much smarter people like General Cavoli to make that case. But I subscribe to his analysis.
The other interesting point that J.D. Vance made this morning was that it's not just about spending, it's about the industrial capabilities of European countries to manufacture their own weapons in times of an extreme crisis, I guess. Is that something that NATO supports, and is that something that you would agree is currently a problem?
Yes, and yes. And I think if I had to summarize what do we need to focus on and what are we going to focus on at the next NATO summit, it is defense spending, and it is increasing and boosting our defense industrial ecosystem, ramping up production, using NATO to send that long-term demand signal to industry to ramp up production. Because again, we are recovering from decades of underinvestment, and we need to massively increase our production capacity. We also need to be better at procuring together, collaborating, reducing barriers to cooperation. All of that will allow us not just to spend more, but also to spend better, generate economies of scale, promote interoperability. And as NATO, we're directly involved in all of these issues: standards, capability targets, collective procurement through our NATO procurement agency, collaboration with the European Union as well. So we are very much looking at all of these issues. And I would just add that there's also, I think, potential to increase industrial cooperation on defense with our partners in the Indo-Pacific. So that would be Japan, the Republic of Korea, New Zealand, Australia. So there are a lot of opportunities. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because when we talk about spending more on defense, we always talk about we talk about what we're spending, but we're also gaining competitiveness, technological edge, jobs, value chain across the transatlantic ecosystem. So I think we also need to explain why that's a good investment for everyone.
It must be unhelpful from your point of view when you're trying to maintain this strong transatlantic alliance to see Europe and America at loggerheads over trade as they are at the moment. Is that an unhelpful factor in the discussions that you have?
Well, what I would say, because I work on defense, so I'm really not qualified to talk about trade policies, but what I will say that I think it's very important, and that's an issue that we are acutely aware of, is in a world of strategic competition, we do need having a strong defense industrial base, and defense and technological industrial base is really key. And I would say it's mission critical. It's a key strategic enabler of our deterrence and defense. So anything that strengthens our industrial capacity, it's actually something that benefits us. I would also say that in the context of NATO, we're looking at increasing defense industrial capacity. We're also looking more and more at the issue of supply chain security for defense critical infrastructure, technologies, materials. That's also really important. So we are doing a slightly different work. It's not focused on economic policies, but it is focused on looking at the national security implication of economic choices and national security implication at times of economic dependencies, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure. So that's another topic where I think there is room for transatlantic cooperation and coordination.
Let's talk about Ukraine specifically. J.D. Vance said I don't think he said he was optimistic, but he said he wasn't pessimistic yet about the state of these negotiations. How do you see it? A lot of people think Russia are essentially stalling here and not really engaging properly. Have you got a view?
Well, I see, I think there is a very clear desire, and more than a desire, a very clear investment in this administration in bringing a durable termination to this conflict, in ending the bloodshed, and in looking forward, and I see this in the recent Ukraine-US minerals agreement, looking forward at a context in which you have a free, sovereign, and secure Ukraine. I think that's a basis upon which you will find a lot of consensus across Europe and the United States. Of course, it is very complex to get to that situation. So for now, I think it's very important to support the efforts of the administrations from many different European capitals. Now the discussion is how can we support this, for example, by continuing to support Ukraine today so that it can continue to defend itself, and it can also be at the negotiation table from a position of strength. And I think that's an important contribution. Then in a day after, if indeed there is a political settlement, there are other ways to contribute to making sure that there is no further aggression, and that Ukraine can indeed be secure, be sovereign and free. And that's also the work we're doing now in Europe.
NATO has been very clear and really fought tooth and nail, not in the literal sense, but vehemently against the Russian occupation in Crimea and the other parts of Ukraine it now occupies. Can you really stomach just turning around and signing all that away to Vladimir Putin?
Well, NATO is not going to sign, and let's be very clear, NATO is not signing anything away. The Ukrainian government, the legitimate representative of the Ukrainian people, is involved in a process that is facilitated by the US administration that will also talk to the Russians, because of course those are the parties to this conflict. And from where I sit, we should support this effort by doing what we're doing, which is support Ukraine now in the short term so that it can continue to defend itself, and so that it can be at the negotiation from a position of strength. Look at future long-term reconstruction in Ukraine. Think about what are the best ways to ensure that Ukraine can be in a position to deter further aggression and ensure its security in the future. And of course, there's also ongoing discussion on security guarantees.
But what does it do to NATO's strategic approach if an aggressor can go in, take those sorts of strategic areas, and be allowed to keep them right on Europe's border? That's surely a negative thing from NATO's strategic point of view.
I would absolutely agree that, and that's why I continue to say what I see from allies, what I see our common interest is a durable end into this conflict that ensures a free, sovereign, and secure Ukraine. And that is a very important starting point. And that is not an outcome that rewards aggression. And I would agree with you that we should be very careful about not rewarding aggression, not the least because we are in a world in which we see growing strategic alignment and cooperation between countries like Russia, the PRC, Iran, the DPRK. We do want to send a signal of credibility and strength. And I think there is an opportunity to do both if this process goes forward.
And in terms of the day after, as you nicely put it, the proposal, as you know, from Britain and France is some sort of European peacekeeping force in Ukraine. Is that realistic without America? Is that dangerous without America?
I mean, the conversation is really just starting, and I think the question is, what does it take to ensure that if there is a political agreement, there is no further aggression, that Ukraine can become prosperous again, can become secure and safe. And there's a number.
What's your view on that? What do you think it takes?
My view is that there's going to be a number of different tools that are going to create some type of multi-layered deterrent. So part of it is the reconstruction. Part of it is going to be about investing and strengthening the Ukrainian armed forces. And here I can see also NATO, we have also the tools to contribute to that long-term force development. And then there is a discussion on how to also signal security guarantees. There's a lot of options on the table. It would be difficult for me to speculate exactly where we will end up. But I think it's very, very important that we're having these conversations and that we have a clear strategic goal. What tactics we'll bring to bear, I think it's going to depend to a large extent on the parameters of this process.
I just want to bring it back to J.D. Vance to finish because we're almost out of time. The Vice President went to Greenland a few weeks ago on a rather high-profile trip. It got scaled back because people in Greenland weren't too keen to see him. What's your view of the way that he and particularly the President of the United States have talked about Greenland over the past few months?
Well, again, I'll stick to my lane, which is security and defense. And I will say from our perspective as NATO, we are very much aware of the increased strategic military and security importance of the High North and the Arctic region. That is something that is even more evident for us after Sweden and Finland became NATO members. So as we stand today, it's clear that the Arctic and the High North are a region of strategic interest, not least because of the growing Russian military presence, the increasingly assertive and presence of the PRC, and of course, seeing the High North as an arena of strategic competition. So in that context, I think we believe that it is important to have a strong situational awareness. It's important to have a strong understanding of dynamics and threats in the High North. Also to think in terms, including through NATO, how do we develop the right capabilities so we can deter and defend credibly in the High North. So in short, yes, it's very important for a collective defense.
Defend it from who, though? That's the president saying he's going to get it one way or another. Does that not worry you as a fellow NATO member watching that sort of talk?
Well, I would go back to the point that the issue is that the issue that we look at from a NATO perspective is, are we correctly postured to ensure deterrence and defense from all strategic directions, and that includes the High North and the Arctic. And those are important conversations that we're having. It's about capabilities, it's about training, it's about exercises, and it's also about increasing cooperation between allies. So those are the discussions we're having on this matter within NATO. Again, I stick to my lane.
You stick to your lane, and you've been saved by the bell on that one, because I'm going to get taken off the stage. Thank you, Benedetta, for your time and for your insight. Next up, we've got Politico's Stephen Overley joining us on stage with Robert Geckel and Kirk Rieckhoff. Please welcome me in joining them. And I think we're going to do a quick stage change first, so give them a moment while we change off. But Benedetta, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for listening.
All right.
Yeah, that way.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Overley, editorial director of Politico Live and host of the Politico Tech podcast. And I want to bring industry perspective into the conversation today, because we know that governments make decisions about spending and about policy, and then often tap industry to implement them. And so that's, I think, the conversation we'll be having today. These geopolitical tensions, whether it's across the Atlantic or around the world, have a direct effect on the bottom line. So that's what I want to dig into. I'm joined today by Rob Geckel, the chairman and CEO of Airbus US Space and Defense, and Kirk Rieckhoff, the defense and security lead at McKinsey & Company. So gentlemen, thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Stephen.
Let's start with the big theme of the day, which is securing the transatlantic relationship. And there's really no doubt that there's a lot of strain on this relationship, perhaps the most strain in recent memory. As business leaders, I'd love to hear from each of you, what is the hardest problem, the biggest question that you are navigating in this moment?
Yeah, I think that as a defense company, the normal proposition is having a good technology, a good value proposition. Is it on schedule? Can it meet a demand signal? And that's usually the key to success. However, as a foreign-owned company, the ligature of our success is the transatlantic alliance, and the strength of that is sort of underpinning our value proposition. So I would say the uncertainty surrounding that is a challenge, and the tariffs, the uncertainty of how long they will last, is also a headwind. But I also see some opportunities, actually, along the lines of what Benedetta and Benedict said as well. I'll pause.
Sure. So I think, look, I'm a consultant, right? So in crisis, there's an opportunity. I would actually say the biggest and the hardest thing that we're seeing right now is the how. there's been a lot of discussion on this stage and before around, how much money are we spending? And we're starting to get alignment there. But how do you spend all of that money in a way that really moves the needle so you get the most out of it? And whether it's, in the NATO context, how much money is going to be spent on spares so you can go for a full 30 days versus for 1 or 2 days, right? Or how do you spend it so that all of the various pieces are interoperable? At the end of the day, it does come down to the how, and that's what's not clear right now.
Well, I've got questions on both tariffs and how we spend this money, so we'll have to answer these big problems in the next 20 minutes. The conventional wisdom is that all of this talk right now on self-sufficiency in Europe, European independence when it comes to security, will be a boon for industry, particularly US industry, right? There's going to be a lot more money up for grabs. Is that actually the case, or is there a downside here that we're overlooking?
Yeah, I think that it will be the case in the near term. But the analysis that I've looked at that I think is compelling is that Europe should try and take advantage of this opportunity to reinforce its defense industrial base in Europe. And I've been dealing with Buy America. I see Sam Adcock, and he and I have been bedfellows here. But you're going to have to be a local citizen to be successful. Airbus is only successful in the U.S. because we've invested, we've built factories, we produce aircraft here, and so we have cleared U.S. nationals. U.S. industry has had the luxury of taking 3-point shots and selling things from the U.S. into Europe. And when this ramp up happens, which I hope it will, there certainly will be a need to buy U.S. technology, and that's a good thing. However, Europe, I believe, should take advantage of this opportunity to industrialize its own defense base and have its own defense systems, have its ability to scale and manufacture in the case of a conflict. And that's also good, right? Because if there are more exquisite systems and technologies in Europe, now you have greater interoperability, you have true allied integrated defense. There's more work that can be done on an allied basis in terms of those systems. And so I view it more as an opportunity for both US industry and European industry.
Is that how you see it, Kirk?
Yeah, actually pretty similar. I think the one other thing I'd add on to that, Rob, is that what will be even more interesting, I think, is as you go down the path, where, because of the models, the various models that the European countries have, are they able to really drive forward on innovation versus the US? And I think you'll start seeing then more exchanges happen, but it won't be at the macro level, it'll be at the specific platforms.
We just heard some comments from the policy director of NATO talking about the need to invest in Europe and reindustrialize in Europe. And this is something that we're hearing both in the US and the EU, right? This desire for the defense industrial complex to be sort of rooted at home. And I think from a government perspective, there's a strong security argument there. From the business perspective, it sounds expensive, right? I mean, I wonder, Rob, to come to you first, how are you thinking about your own supply chains, your own manufacturing? I mean, is this forcing you to reconsider your own strategy?
Yeah, I may be uniquely situated in this regard because the business strategy is pretty simple for Airbus US. To grow in the US, you take European heritage technology, you transfer it to the US, you modify it, you adapt it with US engineers, and you deliver it to the warfighter. So I view this more as an opportunity because if there's more technology development within the affiliated Airbus group, there are more exquisite systems that I can transfer into the US and modify and adapt. I do think that there's also the opportunity to have greater, I'd say, co-production transatlantically, development at the design phase on interoperability of systems. And I think that's an opportunity for Airbus US, where we have familiarity with European systems, but we have cleared US engineers that can actually work in a classified environment. So I view this as it's a crisis, but it's an opportunity. If there is greater spending in Europe, and I think the analysis suggests there should be, and if it's spent coherently, and what I mean by that is, and I'm not European, but what I've observed and absorbed is even though it's less than well below 50% of the US defense budget collectively, you have 5 times as many platforms, right? And so I think if you're investing more coherently with fewer platforms and having greater international collaboration within Europe, you're going to be able to scale faster and you're going to have capabilities quicker. And Airbus, this is my plug, there's no better company to do that. Our aircraft are built, our commercial aircraft are built in the UK, Spain, France, Germany. Same thing with our A400M, our aerial tanker. It's not a sales pitch, I promise.
So you got your sales pitch.
To do more pan-European industrialization rather than balkanizing 8 different national champions, each building their own platform, I think would be a missed opportunity. And for Airbus, given where we're situated as a European company, but with a US defense base, if there's that trajectory towards greater spending in Europe, which I support, I think it's an opportunity for us. Now, I'm not situated like some other US large primes that are looking at this and saying, uh-oh, there goes my big franchise with the UK MOD, because now there's going to be a nascent, strong industrial base that will be competing, and they will have to invest in Europe if they want to be a European player in the defense space. You're right. The defense market, it's a distorted market by nature because we're talking about sovereignty. So it will never be as commercial in nature as other businesses. That is by design. There's no avoiding it. I think that you have to try and mitigate that through collaboration and integrating systems and having some sort of allied defense. If we're pivoting to Asia Pacific, which I think is the right decision, and Europe is industrializing to focus on Europe, and we remain integrated and cooperating, it's going to make us stronger against our collective adversaries. So this is where I have a bit of a rosier view than some. I was based in Paris during the Freedom Fries era. There's been conflict amongst NATO allies for decades. I'm more optimistic of the future, and if this is the catalyst for greater industrialization in Europe, then I think we'll all be stronger collectively.
I mean, I hear the distinction between sort of crisis and opportunity. It sounds like to get from one to the other, though, there are a lot of ifs. One of the biggest ifs right now is tariffs, right? I mean, realistically, every company in the world right now is wondering what's going to happen with tariffs, how it's going to impact their business. I mean, Kirk, when you look at sort of, the defense space in particular, what effects from tariffs are we already seeing, and what are you anticipating?
So right now, I think this is actually what the Vice President said earlier as well. It's very early days, and I don't think we've really seen what's going to be happening there. It's certainly not manifesting that I've seen, and Rob, you should talk to that. But I think in the defense space, it's quite different, right? Where you have to have certification of your whole supply chain. And where is everything coming from? And the degree to which things are already localized is actually going to dampen any of those tariff effects, I think, in the defense space to a large degree. And then you add in the fact that, to the earlier question around ramping up production and building up your own supply chains, that's going to naturally localize, which I think tariffs are just going to heighten that and accelerate that localization.
Yeah, I agree with Kirk. I'm always told economists never agree on anything, but I think they all agree that tariffs, at least in the near term, will make things more expensive and slower and less efficient. That's not a normative judgment of whether tariffs are useful in certain environments or not. I do think that the aerospace industry transatlantically has benefited radically from a tariff-free environment. And there is no shortage of investment in commercial aviation aerospace in the US and in Europe. And I think that the international nature of that market and the tariff-free nature of that market has benefited both sides of the Atlantic. Has it impacted your
business then?
So it's impacting, I'll stay in the defense space because I think AIA and other trade associations are certainly more able to confront the merits of tariffs in commercial aviation. In the defense space, I would say that there's a lot of logic to the historical, what we call the NATO exemption, right? So if you're buying allied defense products and articles that are intended for the warfighter end use, if there's a reciprocal defense agreement, then they're typically tariff-free. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for that when you want technology that's affordable and you want it fast. And you could potentially create the reverse incentive where, if I'm going to sell these products into the US from abroad, guess who pays the tariffs? The US customer.
Right.
If I invest, which I have done, hundreds of millions of dollars to set up factories, guess who now pays the tariffs? I do. I'm now the importer of the allied supply chain. And that is, in my view, counterproductive to incentivizing foreign direct investment. So that's really all I would say. There will be an impact. There will be costs shared by industry and the customer. And I'm hopeful that it's a temporary, not structural evolution to the topic.
Let's say I put both of you at the negotiating table, right? Moderator's privilege. I get to put you at the negotiating table. You get to give some advice to negotiators from the US and EU in particular as they're trying to hash out an agreement. What is one concession each side could make that would move the needle in your particular space, your industry?
Which negotiation are we doing?
The US EU was there.
No, on which topic? On tariffs, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a trap question. I learned from Zelensky not to negotiate in public, and I'm not going to take the bait on that one.
There's got to be something that you think these two sides can agree on here that would benefit your industry.
Right. I would probably start from the proposition that I have already made substantial self-investment in the U.S. market to set up factories, to hire cleared U.S. workers, to build helicopters in Mississippi, elsewhere. I know it sounds like a sales pitch again, but there is your concession. We're here, we're investing, and we're not the only ones. Leonardo is doing it, BAE Systems, Hanwha, Rheinmetall. There's not a problem of foreign direct investment in the defense space in the U.S. Folks are incentivized to come here. The budget's going to be big, it's going to be $1 trillion. As much as we are worried about our own ability to scale and ramp and budgets and resource constraints in the U.S., I believe, for the foreseeable future, will always be more attractive than the rest of the world as a defense market. So I don't think you have a problem that tariffs needs to fix.
Maybe what I'd throw out there is if you're doing this negotiations in a hypothetical sense, right? When I look and I say what's really going to hold industry back from meeting the demands that NATO has, or even the U.S., when you start looking at the set of rules that the government procurement agencies have to deal with, and then government has to deal with, there is just a massive amount of simplification that needs to happen, because we are geared for a 20-year lead cycle, and that is not the world we're in right now when you look at what's happening in the world. So if I could take one thing on the table, I would say, all right, how much do we have to pay to get the rules massively simplified and to consolidate the authority so that people can just get on with making defense stronger?
If we do that and ITAR reform, then that would probably be worth a substantial check.
We're winding down on time, and I do want to talk a bit about spending, right? Because that has been a big question of days. If both the US and the EU are going to be spending all of this money on defense, the question on my mind is, where should it go, right? The reality is the nature of war is changing, the technology of war is changing. We've seen Ukraine as kind of a prime example of this. Where are the US and the EU underinvesting in each of your views?
In the U.S., putting aside my hat, I do think that more needs to be done, and the reconciliation, I think, was somewhat encouraging in this in terms of the industrial base itself, whether it's shipbuilding, whether it's infrastructure. I do think that that's something that has been underinvested in. Otherwise, I think that the administration is focusing on the right things, right? A high-low mix. You have some exquisite systems, then you have more attritable. Unmanned, you can clearly see that this administration is moving more towards unmanned, drawing some of the lessons of Ukraine, being able to operate in fully comms-denied environments, sensors, GPS-denied environments, electronic warfare. I think those are all areas. And there's also a lot of interesting new entrants in the space that are self-investing, and it's not so much investment. I would say, back to Kirk's point, how does the DoD move quicker to operationalize and scale innovations that are being made? Can you move faster? Can you move commercially? I've left you 10 seconds, sorry.
No, I'll make it fast then. I think I would flip it on a different axis. I think where we are underinvesting is in the non-sexy stuff. I think the large platforms, whether it's hypersonics, you name the new things that people are excited about, that's all going fine. I think people know that world. It is a set of things, it is the IT infrastructure that is supposed to connect all of these digitally enabled assets, whether it's the F-35 connecting back to satellites, connecting through to KAOC and all the way back. It is those sorts of things that are not stressed yet because we're not in a war, and that's where I think we're actually missing areas where it's not actually going to work like we want it to, and that's where we need to invest more.
Got it. Well, there's a lot more I'd love to unpack. We are out of time, but I thank you both for being here today to chat through this. Coming up next, we'll have a quick stage change, but then Politico's Politics Bureau Chief and Senior Political Columnist Jonathan Martin will be here in conversation with Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi.
Great.
So I go out now?
Yep.
Oh,
Right
okay.
up the stairs.
Right up the stairs. Right up the stairs. Here we are. We're talking to your previous guest.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. A woman who needs no introduction. Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. There's black smoke in Rome, not white smoke, Speaker. So
For
no
today.
no news just yet.
today.
But we'll be watching the Vatican closely. And I want to talk to you about that. But first, thank you for being here. And let's start with some news of the day. The Vice President Vance was here earlier. He had a different tone today than he did a couple of months ago in Munich. What do you make of that? It's sort of a softer approach toward Europe.
Well, it was a better approach, I would say. It was well received by the Munich Security Council conference people who came, and I liked what he said about being more, shall we say, open to the relationship.
Yes.
A, B, that any peace agreement any negotiation between Putin and Zelensky, between Russia and Ukraine would have to have Ukraine at the table. It isn't about U.S. and Russia. It's about Ukraine at the table, and that what the Russians were asking for in the prep for the negotiation, they were asking too much. So I was pleased with everything that he said.
Speaker, what does a just and lasting peace look like in Ukraine?
Well, here's what I think, because I went there. I was the first person of high rank to go to about 6 weeks after the invasion
Kyiv.
to Ukraine. It was scary. We thought we were going to die, but that was okay. We were dying for democracy as they were. But and I've studied this very carefully and watched it very carefully. Had the First Lady here, had President Zelensky to a joint session. But what was happening to the civilians in Ukraine is a crime against humanity, a sin against nature. Kidnapping the children, thousands of children taken to Russia, some of them infants who don't even know their names. Now they're in Russia. Rape of women in front of their children, in front of their parents, horrible, horrible. And murder of families in front of each other and again in front of children. These kinds of acts by the troops, I said, aren't these Russian troops becoming animals because they're soldiers? And others said to me, no, Russian soldiers don't do anything they aren't told to do. This is Putin. So I don't see in a negotiation how they rape your kidnap women, kidnap your children, murder your civilians, and then say, now you have to give them land so that they leave.
But how else do you get to a peace if the Ukrainians are not willing to cede some land to the Russians?
Well, that's going to be up to the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
That's going to be up to the Ukrainians. They'll have to make that measure. But really...
Should Crimea be on the table, do you think?
Well, I don't even know why Crimea was overtaken. So I want to go back. No, I was in
2014.
Ukraine right after that and met with a lot of the people, the volunteers, the demonstrators, and the rest of that. But again, it's going to be up to the people of Ukraine to determine what will happen next. And they're saying they're not giving up Crimea. We'll just see.
What's the most constructive thing that our administration, that this administration in the U.S. could do to get to a just and lasting peace in Ukraine?
Speed, length of weapons, just strength for the Ukrainians to protect their country and then negotiate from strength.
Have you talked to anybody in the administration, whether it's Secretary Rubio or the president, vice president, about this issue of Ukraine at all?
No, I haven't. No, I've spoken to them through the airwaves, but I have not spoken to them in person.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't come as a surprise to you, does that?
Well, I wasn't sure if they were still on your speed dial or not. Talk to me for a second about some of the other issues that obviously are clear and present in the minds of this conference. Greenland, for example, which obviously a part of our NATO alliance. The Danes are deeply concerned about our designs on Greenland. Is there a way to give everybody a way to save face on Greenland? Is there an opportunity for us to have additional bases, for example, for our military on Greenland? Perhaps a joint NATO operation with other Nordic countries and the U.S. in Greenland. Is that an option, do you think?
Well, it depends on the people of Greenland. It's their territory. Now, I've been to Greenland. Before the vice president went several years ago, I brought a delegation, was the highest ranking delegation ever to go to Greenland, and we went because of the climate crisis. And we went there, and we went right to where the scientists were, practically underground. And what they told us that they were measuring then, say this is about 2008, around that time, they told us that what they were measuring in terms of the melting of the Arctic, by the time it got to the peer review, it would already be obsolete, that the melting was going so fast. So we went because of climate and a big delegation, bipartisan. It was really important. And if we had reached out to Greenland to talk about cooperating on security, on climate,
right,
on all of that would have been a very positive thing. I think that more people think that Elvis Presley is alive in the United States than Greenlanders who think they want to be part of the United States. It's like 6%.
But is it in our geopolitical interest to have more of a military presence in Greenland, to have for example, cutters there, given how important the Arctic is going forward with the Chinese and the Russians?
Yeah, well, the thing is again, this is their country, so it's up to them. We do have a important military base there.
Right.
Should we have more? That's a matter of negotiation with them. But you're so right. The Arctic is, when we were there, they told us, now this is again, 13 years ago or something, they told us where we were going by boat, we could have gone by sled, except it had all melted in the years, in the previous years. So the melting is happening there. Its impact on climate is important. Its impact on global security is vital. It's just a remarkable thing that you can see before your very eyes. So yeah, it is important for there to be conversation about how we are strongest. That doesn't just mean us, it means NATO, as you mentioned.
Right.
It means Denmark, which is, shall we say,
a very interested party, at least.
Right, in Greenland.
Speaking of NATO, I mean, this is obviously sort of front of mind for everybody in this room, and it's the overlay of this conference, and certainly was the overlay of the conference in February, which is, can Europe, can the EU, and obviously NATO still count on the U.S. as a reliable partner. Is the transatlantic relationship still enduring these 70 years later? Can you today sit here and tell Europe that they can still rely on us?
Well, I absolutely hope so. I think it's essential to global security that the United States be an essential part of it. Tomorrow, the 7th, the 8th of May, is the 80th, not 70th, the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And since then, we've developed this incredible security alliance called NATO. And I was pleased when I was Speaker to have a Secretary General of NATO speak to a joint session of Congress, very well received at that time. And it's really essential for America to be a big part of that. And I don't think the door has been shut on that, even though there's been some comments that might not be preferable. Right. But I don't think they're dispositive of the issue. But imagine this, 80 years ago. I actually was saying this at an earlier speech or presentation for the conference, and I didn't realize there were so many Germans in the audience. No offense, but that's what we were celebrating, was the defeat of Nazism and fascism. Right. They didn't take it personally. Frankly, the Germans have said to us, from the president of Germany, the former former chancellors have said to me, you not only freed yourself, Europe, you freed us. Right. You freed us.
You don't think that when it comes to the transatlantic relationship, that President Trump reflects the American consensus?
No, I don't. No, I think that
he's an aberration.
Well, it's an opinion. Yeah. Too many people in America have. I've been to all these things each year, every 5 years, whether it's Normandy, the anniversary of Normandy this year, again, the Battle of the Bulge in December. That's where I fell. That's why I'm wearing sneakers. And the American people have ownership of that wonderful triumph that was the victory in Europe. Well, in Japan as well, but just talking about Europe right now for the Transatlantic Alliance. So I think that, and we're largely people from those countries. Right. From those countries. And if you talk about the Baltics, if you talk about Poland, you talk about Germany, you talk about Italy, we talk about so many of those countries, our families are all from there. So there is some of it long-term, but all of it essential to our strength, the connection, the transatlantic cooperation that we must have.
And speaking of the Baltics, there's obviously deep concern there about that being the next destination that Putin would go to. Can you reassure the Baltic states that we'd honor our NATO commitments if Putin doesn't go into Estonia, for example?
Well, since you mentioned Estonia, I had a meeting with the delegation from Estonia. I guess it was yesterday. I'm losing track of time. From Estonia, and they assured me they're not afraid. They're not afraid. They have had their recognition of the threat that Russia is and has been to them for a long time. But the Baltics and Poland have proximity. They're right there. And we visited Poland when we were there to go to Kyiv. And they just want to be fortified, and they want... Article 5 of NATO assures people that if they are invaded, that NATO will be there for them.
And you're confident that we'd honor that?
Just as they all honored it on 9/11. Right. They didn't ask us how much we were giving to NATO or anything else. They just honored Article 5.
And are you confident that we honor that if the Russians...
Yeah, I think so. You
think so?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it is a commitment of the United States of America.
Right.
I know that there have been some doubt shed on it by certain things said, I don't know, frivolously or whatever, by the president when he was president before. I haven't heard him say it this term, right. But I do think that if we as the United States of America do not honor our commitments, I don't know how we expect people to honor their commitments to us.
I was struck yesterday by the president's meeting with Prime Minister Carney from Canada, because obviously there was a sort of awkwardness in the room given the president's designs on Canada to be our 51st state. And obviously Carney ran a campaign saying that, hell no, we're not going to be the 51st state. But putting that aside, there was consensus in the room between Trump and Carney, I thought, when it came to the Canadians increasing their defense spending. And this is an important issue, obviously, that's on the mind of a lot of folks here, which is our NATO allies increasing their defense spending. Trump obviously does things in a unique fashion, but I was struck yesterday that Carney effectively said, you're kind of right about that, and we are going to increase our defense spending.
Well, they have. They're like 5% of GDP, the Canadians. They really had been increasing their defense spending. A lot of this started under Obama, by the way,
right,
about saying everybody had to come up to 2%. And of course, the President Trump made that point very clearly that he wanted to see. But I don't think that the President of the United States should say to a NATO country, if you haven't paid 2%, I say to Russia, have at them.
Let me ask you about a different part of the world, one that you've worked on for decades, and that's China. The vice president said today that we're trying to rebalance our interest in China to benefit the American worker. Tell me how concerned you are about this trade war with the Chinese, and tell me what's the end game. How can we best get to a resolution with the Chinese on trade initially, but more broadly in terms of the bilateral relationship?
Well, in terms of trade, it has been, we want to have fairness in trade. When I first having my fights with China around the time of Tiananmen Square, before many of you were born in this room, that we were fighting them because we had lack of market access. They would not let our products in. B, they were pirating our intellectual property. And they were demanding that if we wanted to manufacture in China, access to the cheap labor, we had to give them our designs. And then they said, we don't need you anymore. We can make this product ourselves. So that wasn't really fair. And so we wanted just a fair situation between us, and hopefully that we can have that. But our concerns with China were threefold. One, economic trade. Two was security. They were selling all kinds of equipment.
Right.
Some of it equipment for nuclear technology, for weapons of mass destruction, to rogue countries. And the third, of course, were human rights and the way they have treated their people.
Secretary Besson is going to Switzerland this weekend.
Yeah,
It turns out not to talk about chocolate, your favorite thing, but to
Dark.
or one of your favorite things, besides Steph Curry, but to talk to the Chinese Speaker Pelosi about a sort of climb down from this trade conflict attempts. Obviously, you're not terribly fond of President Trump. Last time I checked, do you have some confidence in Scott Bessent to get some kind of a better negotiation here?
Well, last thing I heard earlier today was that they weren't going to come to an agreement in Switzerland.
They were going to talk,
have a
right?
conversation, I guess. But I hope so. I've always hoped for the best. We always want our president to succeed at doing the right thing for our country.
Right.
But I don't know what their prospects are for that. But I would say, quoting in the Reagan building, trust and verify.
Yeah. Obviously, you served with the president the first time around. It was rocky. We survived as a country. How concerned are you this time around about how this all ends with Trump? Candidly.
I'm very concerned because I think that there's so many things at stake. Our democracy, the integrity of our elections, which is essential to our democracy. Just the budget. The budget, this is what I'm going to have to leave here and run to the floor for vote. The budget should be a statement of our national values. What is important to us as a country should be reflected in that budget. Right now, they have a budget where they're asking their members to take $800 billion out of the budget so they can give a tax break to the wealthiest people in America. The Medicare, that's Medicaid, that's for Medicaid. Medicare, same thing. Social Security in doubt. So many aspects, well, name any subject, the arts, museums, all of that. But I'm talking about life and death, healthcare issues for the American people, kitchen table issues for the American people. This is the fight we're in. So you can talk about other things. They talk about Alcatraz, they talk about this. They're all diversionary tactics. What is important is to stay focused on what means something to the lives of the American people. And that's really the fight we're in. Before I came here, I was in between Munich and here I was on the Mall for a vigil that will last 24 hours to hands off our Medicaid.
Do you think he will leave office voluntarily in 28?
Sure, of course he will.
Okay.
Of course he will. Now let me just say,
who is the Nancy Pelosi favorite for the next pope?
I was at the Pope's funeral. I love Pope Francis. I hope that we will have someone in his with his kindness and goodness for people. But I do believe, as I was raised, if any of you are Catholic, that the Spirit of the Holy Ghost will determine who these cardinals choose, and that they will act upon the inspiration.
Who do you admire among the prominent cardinals you talked about?
Well, I admire the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Cardinal McElroy. Do you know him? He's fantastic. He's from California.
I think he's a long shot.
Born in San Francisco.
I think he's a long shot.
I don't think he's even interested. But you asked me who I admired. Among those, well, it just depends. I mean, Pope Francis appointed, it was 133 who will vote. He appointed about, 106 of them. And so they may be of his, or they may reflect what he did globally. He appointed cardinals from all over. So there's a Filipino, an Asian Francis in the Philippines who's wonderful.
He seems promising, huh?
He seems promising. There's an Italian who's progressive. Not all the Italians are progressive, but he is. And so we'll just see.
Do you think we'll see female priests in your kids' lifetime?
In my kids, maybe my grandkids.
Yeah.
That's one of the debates they were having when we were over there. The role of women in the church, attitudes to LGBTQ, issues that relate to divorced Catholics, can they receive communion? And if they remarry, oh my gosh, can they still receive communion? Those kinds of day-to-day things that the church has not really fully resolved. But the role of women, I mean, remember this, these priests, and that's why the cardinals, the bishops, the rest of them, although we don't have shared, I mean, I'm excommunicated, so what should I be saying? I'm excommunicated. But I did receive communion at the Vatican when Pope Francis was right there in the next pew. So
that's a good sign.
That was a good sign. It was that was a message to my own Archbishop. But all of that is about having a church that is a comfort, that is a forgiving body, that is something that, see, I believe Christ is my Savior. As I said to you before, I believe that the Holy Ghost is going to inspire these cardinals. I'm a believer now. Some people believe, some don't. But these cardinals, these archbishops, these bishops, these priests, every day they have the privilege of saying Mass and the miracle of transubstantiation, the body, bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. Women should be able to do that.
I didn't think that we were going to have an altar call at the Munich Security Conference, which I think would be a first, and I'm not going to call for one. But I did want to ask you one final thing, Speaker, about a topic that I know that you care deeply about and that you've been deeply involved with since October 7th, and that is this humanitarian effort that is an extraordinary effort that's being engineered by St. Jude's Children's Hospital and a host of other people and institutions to get children with cancer out of Gaza. And I wrote a column this week about some of the concerns about the Jordanian pledge earlier this year to take 2,000 kids, and King Abdullah has not taken even 50 kids yet. What's your message to the king, but also to other figures around the Arab world when it comes to saving these kids?
Well, I think His Majesty will honor his commitment. I think that anytime we're trusting in King Abdullah of Jordan, we're in good hands. The problem was really on the Israeli side, that they were not going to let these families be reunited if they wish to be reunited in Gaza, and now they have said that they would let them go there. But let me just say this one more thing, since we're in the Reagan building.
Yes.
One of the subjects that came up quite a bit in each of the meetings I was at for Munich, where it's about tariffs. Tariffs. That was just a prevailing issue. Well, since we're in the Reagan building, I have to read you Reagan's statement on this. And it won't take long. It'll just take a minute.
And you served with President Reagan because you came to the Congress in '87.
Yeah, I did. He was a gentleman, yes. Ronald Reagan, when he was a young man, and they passed the Smoot-Hawley law was in the 20s.
How'd that go?
And they told people that it was going to create jobs and do this and do that. And what it created was the Great Depression. Yeah. So Ronald Reagan has always been against that. And when he voted for the first time, 21 years old then, he voted for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Ronald Reagan, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he said in 1988, he told that story, and he also told gave the impression that what happened then was happening again in 1988. And he said, 1988, this happens to me all the time. Okay, so here's the end there. And this is what he said. This is 1988, Ronald Reagan. I quote him all the time.
Yeah.
I do.
No, you're a big admirer of his.
Trade and immigration and Russia, none better.
Pretty good actor, too.
Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, pretty good actor.
I don't know about that. Trade is an economic alliance that benefits both countries. There's no losers, only winners, and trade helps strengthen the free world. Our peaceful trading partners, he said, are not our enemies. They are our allies. We should beware of demagogues. This is 1988. Beware of demagogues who are ready to declare a trade war against our friends, weakening our economy, our national security, and the entire free world, all while cynically waving the American flag. Ronald Reagan. The expansion of international economy is not a foreign invasion. It is an American triumph, one we worked hard to achieve, and something central to our vision of peaceful and prosperous world of freedom. Ronald Reagan in this. Not he didn't say it in this building, but his building. Ronald Reagan, then another speech I want you to read, look it up. This is the last speech I will make as President of the United States, just hours before the new president is sworn in. That would be George Herbert Walker Bush, on immigration. And you know what he said about Russia. That's 3 R's. I mean, the 3 Ronald Reagans. Look them up.
A Filipino priest, Nancy Pelosi praising Ronald Reagan.
No?
And Alcatraz is not coming back, or it is coming back as a prison?
Oh, come on. That falls into the distraction of distraction.
No more, all right. So no Alcatraz.
No.
It's staying a tourism engine for San Francisco.
Yeah. And well, no, it's a national park for the U.S. taxpayer. But don't forget one other thing. Go Warriors.
And most importantly, Steph Curry, back to the title. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, thank you very much. Great to see you. And thanks to all of you for coming today. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Speaker. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.